And then you're crazy. I said, you have to explain your job to your grandmother, to change your mind, for you to remember that when you're talking to the client, you're not talking to an expert in SAP. You're talking about an expert in aeronautics and manufacturing. And for managers now, given the number of second language speakers who are in all of our businesses, especially among deskless workers, you have to pay attention to the fact that you're speaking to people for whom English is not their first language. We do that. We actually do that all the time, but we don't think about the second language speakers as an audience that we need to cater to.
Yeah, there's a whole, the idea in clear communications is thinking about what your audience needs to hear and making sure that there's a whole idea of what you intend to say, what you actually said, what you think they heard, and what they heard, and what they actually remember or interpret it. Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Ponto. Each week, I bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Myke Wilder. Myke is an ESL coach and TEDx speaker who helps leaders bridge the communication gaps by making English more accessible and inclusive. He is a native of Montreal, Canada, where the language of business is French. He has worked in 2 languages his entire life, starting with the family business at age 11, then 3 decades in corporate communications, followed by 13 years teaching business English around the world. His corporate experience, his years working with a hearing disability, and his lifetime of working in his second language have given him a unique perspective on the feelings and challenges facing ethnic English speakers, speaking language leaders, and their language stakeholders, and are now multilingual business world of second language English. Congrats on improving communication between cultures, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show to talk about this challenge that's is actually kind of going unnoticed by so many leaders out there, which is when you're working cross borders with teams in different cultures in different parts of the world, they're often not native English speakers. And so understanding how to communicate with those teams effectively is really important. And I don't think enough people put as much an emphasis on its importance as they should. So how do you help managers communicate clearly with multilingual teams?
One of the first things that we work on is voice, is training managers to speak, to be understood, and not use conversational English, because this is not conversational English. This is conversational English. And we use connected speech, and we use all kinds of idioms and all kinds of expressions, and it's really fine for us to talk, but over 80% of the 2.2 billion English second language speakers in the world can't understand us when we speak that way.
Yeah, it makes me think of, there was from the television show, the animated show Archer from years ago, they had one where he was kept talking in idioms, and there's a translator who's like, I can't translate that because your idioms don't translate to this other language, like stop speaking in idioms. And I don't think people realize how much of their language is these kind of shared knowledge and the conversational casual stuff that if you're not as immersed in the culture, or if you just have learned the language in a classroom versus having it as part of your daily life, you just don't have that same understanding. And so on top of like the conversational English plus or like the corporate jargon that doesn't translate over exactly as easily as you'd expect, I can see how communication is wrought with problems because there's just so much more going on that people aren't aware of.
Well, it breaks into essentially 2 categories, 2 halves. There's how we say it and what we say. Mm-hmm. How we say it in conversational English is really incomprehensible because the words all merge. Okay, like we don't say an apple. You would never say, I want an apple. You say, I want an apple. And you take the N off the end of the article and you put it at the beginning of apple, an apple. And that is one of the main ways that connected speeches work. As English speakers, we hate words that start with vowels. It has to do with the structure in our throats, in our larynx. Vowels origin is down here, not in the mouth, and it's hard. So we just naturally learn that if there is a word that starts with a vowel, then we're going to take the consonant off the preceding word, off that word, and add it to the word that starts with a vowel. So it starts with a consonant. And now you have the two words jammed together. And if you're not that good at English, it makes it hard to understand. You can't pick the words out. So to work at not connecting speech, that is one of the first things. And the second thing is, you're absolutely correct. There is so much cultural information in our English that with idioms and expressions and phrasal verbs, which are crazy, it makes it very difficult. So we have to think about what we're saying, and we have to think about how we're saying it.
And I imagine that I know there's some similar kind of quirks in different languages, but I've also just, and I'm sure it's just because of my being a native English speaker, but just contractions also must be really weird for a lot. Does that translate very well? Because I'd imagine all the shortening, it seems like what we're doing when you talk about an apple, it happens with like can't or don't or won't, where it's, or is that easier for people to grasp than the an apple example?
It isn't a question of it being easier to grasp. One of the issues is that most people who speak second language English didn't learn from an ethnic English speaking teacher. And I always say ethnic English speaking. Native is really running out of favor. So the teachers, and that's how I learned French. So I understand that you don't pick up a lot of the things, but a teacher, even a non-ethnic English speaking teacher, will teach contractions. There'll be a class on that because they're so common and prevalent. That's not a large issue usually.
Okay. So from leaders you've worked with on helping them improve their communication, is there a common starting point, or what does that journey look like, and what's the impact when they're finally improving the way they communicate?
The starting point always is to focus on saying the content words. I'll explain. So saying the content words clearly. Content words are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. I know this all sounds like an English lesson, but if I were to say to you, I went to the store and bought some apples. I went to the store and bought some apples. Okay, that's a sentence. If I just said, went store, bought apples. Now, that's not a good sentence, but you can put together a general idea of what it was that I was saying, because the content words carry the information. All those other little words, the function words, they make the grammar work, and they're important. But the information you want to convey is in those content words. And if you can focus on saying those with clarity and not mushing them together with a bunch of other things, then you've got a really good leg up on being more understandable.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's one of those things that people learn to speak when you learn to speak when you're a kid. You learn some more advanced language as you go to school, but you don't ever really take a time to audit how you speak. unless you take a public speaking class or you're in like a Toastmaster trip where you kind of get feedback on how you speak and your filler words and the sort of language you're using. Most people, because you do it every day and it's just you have your own natural way of doing it, you don't really think about the way you speak. And so I can see how that there's one thing to understand the grammar of a sentence, but it's another one to think about the words you say as you say them and to be that focused on your speech, especially if you're in a business setting where there's usually so many other things vying for your attention when you're just trying to communicate something to someone. Taking the time and the effort to focus on that must be a new habit a lot of leaders have to build.
That's why I call it mindset training. It is multilingual mindset training. That it has to be, you are thinking about your audience more than you're thinking about you speaking. You're speaking to be understood. And, we do this all the time. I'll make this really quick. I was working on an SAP change management team for a huge manufacturing company. And we had our first meeting with the clients. And everybody was talking about what they did. And this guy says, oh, I'm an ABAPer and I engaged to integrate the extraneous technical blah, 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 blah. An ABAPer is a coder in SAP. And I could see the clients who are really professional guys who made airplanes, and they're just sinking in their seats because they have no idea what this guy's talking about. And I started doing training, and this is 22 years ago, before I ever started doing what I'm doing now. And I said, I want you to explain your job to your grandmother. And then, you're crazy. I said, you have to explain your job to your grandmother to change your mind, for you to remember that when you're talking to the client, you're not talking to an expert in SAP. You're talking about an expert in aeronautics and manufacturing. And for managers now, given the number of second language speakers who are in all of our businesses, especially among deskless workers, you have to pay attention to the fact that you're speaking to people for whom English is not their first language. We do that. We actually do that all the time, but we don't think about the second language speakers as an audience that we need to cater to.
Yeah, there's the idea in clear communications is thinking about what your audience needs to hear and making sure that there's a whole idea of what you intend to say, what you actually said, what you think they heard, or what they heard, and what they actually remember or interpret it. And that all has different filters, like the telephone game, even just between two people. And then there's part of that you don't really realize is if they're an ethnic English speaker or not, and how that can complicate things. And when you're working with a communications team or a marketing team, it doesn't seem to be something that comes up a lot, which is, are we speaking as an English speaking audience, but are they ethnic English speakers or not? Because that can have a big impact, but it's not something I've heard come up very much. So I can see how that would be a unexpected complication that could derail the effectiveness of a communication effort.
What's interesting is that this is actually a much wider activity than it used to be. In 2023, the International Organization of Standards issued an ISO for plain language writing. And we know ISOs are, you study, you work, you train, and your company gets certified for excellence in whether it's, your supply chain or your transportation management or whatever. And now there's one for plain language writing, which focuses on creating documents where the reader can quickly find the information that they need and use the information they need, and understand and use the information they need. There's no ISO for plain language speaking, but I always enjoy talking to the the ISO people about that, because it really is the same thing. We just need to, I coined a term in a speech in October, your verbal typography. So we worry about in writing, is the font clear? Is the font big enough? Are the bullet points structured correctly? Have we organized the material so people can read it more easily? And now we need to develop a more verbal typography to speak with clarity and be understood.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things as well that you can't just take a seminar or even get that sort of ISO certification and have one person on your team that's good at this thing and they're in charge of all the talking. That just doesn't work. So you have to really build the habit out of it and be more mindful in general about the way you speak. And it can be the sort of thing where you, like when you're doing a more formal presentation, you speak differently than if you're at a bar talking with your coworkers. So but at least being aware of what the difference is in how you communicate and when you need to use that and how to identify the indicators that sort of communication is needed is a whole new set of habits and skills that take time to develop.
It absolutely takes some time to develop. And the leadership side is driving that change through the organization. Because if you cannot get your ethnic English speaking team on board to support the second language speaking members of the team, then you're just going to build silos and it's not going to work well for you.
Yeah, and the cost of that communication is huge. I had an episode drop recently about just the cost of avoiding difficult conversations, or trying to work around difficult individuals on a team or on the client side instead of having the difficult conversations, and how it can cost it's like $7,500 a person for every time they're avoiding these conversations, just for in reduced productivity and effectiveness and revenue. And I can see, however, if there's these silos in different departments because of these language barriers, it's not just one person that this is impacting. It could be entire teams, and the financial impact of this for an organization that's over the world and has thousands of employees could be massive, and it's totally worth addressing and as quick as possible, because like I said, it takes a while for these things to kick in. It's not just a switch you flip and everyone's communicating properly.
A miscommunication, according to the US government, costs US businesses $1.2 trillion a year in errors that could be avoided, in accidents because safety information isn't transmitted well, in people getting fed up and leaving because they're working in chaos and they're working in fear because they can't understand. And we all know that the costs of onboarding are quite a bit. So there are a lot of places where ROI shows up in adopting a plan like this.
So when someone's first starting out, or what are some of the signs people can look for in their organization that this is something they need to start paying attention to yesterday?
Okay, the first thing to look at is how big is the turnover in your employee body of people who are second language speakers. Now, I've spoken to people in the food service, and their whole staff is turning over 3 times a year. It's like, that's crazy. All they're doing is onboarding people, and they never build any intellectual capital, because people come, stay 3 months, 4 months, and they go because they're fed up. So there's that. And you can measure workplace accidents. But when you're talking to people, there are a lot of eye cues. Like if you're speaking to someone and their eyes sort of go up, it's not that they've stopped listening, but they're trying to process what you're saying and they're falling behind in the conversation. So if you're talking to someone, especially if it's an L2, a second language speaker, and you see them like this, then just stop for a second. Give them 2 seconds to catch up. Brains really work fast. And then when they come back to you and they look at you, say, we're okay? Right, let's go. And the other thing is that verifying, never ask somebody, did you understand? Asking somebody if they understood, they're always going to say yes. The question to ask is, what's your first step? Or what are the first 2 or 3 things you're going to do when we finish talking, when this conversation ends? That's how you verify comprehension. And the last thing, I'm just going to say this, is this symbol, this gesture, when it's introduced into departments, can be really powerful. And when someone holds their hand up like this letter C, it stands for comprehension or clarity, if you like. And if you put this into your meeting protocol, because people never want to say, oh, could you stop? I didn't understand that. They draw attention to themselves. They feel that they look stupid. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to interrupt, but they can signal. And that lets the speaker know, I'll finish my sentence. I'll finish this bullet point, whatever. And then I can come back and say, okay, what do I need to say differently? And that makes meetings work a lot smoother. And if you're seeing a forest of these, then you have to work on your voice.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for connecting with me today, Myke. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection Podcast, please like and leave a review and subscribe. If you want to learn more about myself or Myke, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.